Hey, this is Coach Anderson from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online U.S. History from 1877 to present. Today we're going to pick up with Unit 13, America from Nixon to Clinton. And we're going to look at a period in American history where there's going to be a lot of turbulence. And we're going to find that our presidency will be one of those roots, causes of the turbulence that we'll have, of course, in the country. And we're going to find that a lot of Americans are going to start to question whether or not the government is truthful to them. And that's what we're going to pick up with today. We're going to start with the Nixon years. Now, Nixon will be elected president in 1968, having lost the presidency in 1960, even though he had been the incumbent vice president under Eisenhower 4 years prior. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at our unit focus question, and we have three that we're going to address. Now, we will not, of course, answer these questions at the end of the lesson, but at the end of the unit, we will. Number one, what effect did the Nixon presidency have on American public psyche? Two, why did conservatism become such an attractive political philosophy in the United States? And three, describe the effect of technology and scientific innovation on the increased globalization of the United States of America. Well, when we look at it, we're also going to have some vocabulary we're going to introduce, and it's going to be academic vocabulary and then content vocabulary. And it's just we always tell you, go ahead and write these terms down in your journal and define them yourself. And what we will do, of course, is address as many of them as we can as they come up, of course, in the lesson. We have two lesson-focused questions that we will address at the end of the lesson. Number one, why was Nixon able to win the election of 1968, having lost the election of 1960? And two, what were Nixon's foreign policy goals? First, we'll start with the journal topic, though. Take out your journals again, write down this particular question, and tell us what you think. What factors do you think contribute to Richard Nixon's victory in the 1968 presidential election? So at this time, take a few minutes, mull your answer, and write it down, and we'll be back to discuss in a few moments. There are many reasons why Nixon won the election in 1968. At the top of it probably was Vietnam. Now, Johnson, of course, doesn't run for re-election in 1968 because of Vietnam and because of the unpopularity that it brings. Now, what we will tell you, though, there's more than what meets the eye here. And we'll come back and we'll expand on this a little bit later as we go through the lesson, and we'll tell you all the reasons why, not just one particular reason, but all the reasons why Nixon is successful in 1968. All right, what we're going to do is talk about the silent majority. Now, the silent majority were those Americans in the 1960s that were quiet. They were the ones that were the, I guess the easiest way to describe them is they were the mature people in the 1960s. And one of the things that they longed for was a law and order president. And what they get with Nixon, they feel like, is a law and order president. And one of the things that they do with Nixon, or what they seem to believe that they can get from Nixon that they didn't get from the other presidents, was an end to Vietnam and an end to the racial strife and the political strife in the American society at that time. So we're going to talk about some of the things that the silent majority wanted and the reason why they elect Nixon in 1968. Number one, turmoil in America over Vietnam. Now, we had violence at Kent State, we had violence at Jackson State, and majority of Americans wanted that to end, and the only way that they believed it could end is if we get out of Vietnam, and that's one of the promises that President Nixon, of course, promises. Political and social upheaval from the deaths of Dr. King and Robert F. Kennedy. They wanted stability. You have to understand, with the death of Dr. King and the death of Robert F. Kennedy, you lose two, big figures in 1960s American society. The lack of unification in the Democratic Party with the death of RFK. When Robert F. Kennedy is killed at the Ambassador Hotel in 1968 following a campaign event, we're going to find that the Democratic Party is going to be in such disarray that it'll be a little bit easier for Nixon to win the election in 1968. He defeats Hubert Humphrey in a landslide. 4, Nixon's Southern strategy lists Strom Thurmond's support in South Carolina to attract Democrats to the Republican Party by slowing desegregation. There were Democrats in 1968 that voted Republican for Nixon because of Strom Thurmond, who was the senator from South Carolina's support. And what he basically did is he and Nixon made a deal, and the deal would be that Strom Thurmond and Nixon both would engage in a plan to slow down segregation. So what Thurmond does is he takes and he is able to siphon off votes from Hubert Humphrey's campaign and from George Wallace's campaign, who was running a third-party candidacy from the Dixiecrats, and siphon those votes, of course, to the Republican candidate, in this case, Nixon. The silent majority flocked to Nixon, and he's represented a change in direction for the country, which included peace, law and order, restrict the rights of criminals given under the Warren Court by appointing Warren Burger after the retirement of Errol Warren, and domestic stability. A lot of people felt like that the country, of course, was going in the wrong direction. They felt like it was the court under Errol Warren was too liberal, and it was going too much in a direction to protect protect the rights of criminals, and not necessarily, reflecting or doing what it could, of course, to provide law and order. 6, Nixon also promised new federalism to reduce the size of the federal bureaucracy and reverse the Great Society programs and reform the welfare system. So when you look at these 6 things, coupled with the fact that, the Democratic Party's in shambles, we're going to find that Nixon will win the election in 1968. And that's probably not a good thing for Nixon, because it's going to cause him to make some decisions a little bit later that are going to be detrimental to his presidency. Here's a picture of Justice Warren Burger, who replaces Earl Warren and makes the Supreme Court a little bit more conservative. Here's Senator Strom Thurmond from South Carolina, who was a segregationist senator who used his influence to help Nixon to make inroads with the Democratic voters in the southern United States. All right, let's talk a little bit about Nixon's foreign policy. It was called the Nixon Doctrine. It was Nixon's plan to end American involvement in Vietnam, to reduce foreign dependence on the U.S., to fight their battles, and create détente, or a relaxation of tensions between the U.S., China, and the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Henry Kissinger was Nixon's national security advisor and later becomes the Secretary of State under Nixon, and he was the most responsible for Nixon reaching his foreign policy decisions, particularly détente. And one of the things that we're going to find with Nixon is this here. He doesn't put all of his cards out there. Now, he's telling America, of course, that he wants to get America with, out of Vietnam, peace with honor, and then Vietnamization, the gradual decrease. But we're going to find that a lot of people will look at Nixon and question him a little bit because of some things that will come out a little bit later with the Pentagon Papers. And we'll talk about that as it comes up. Here's a picture of Henry Kissinger, Nixon's national security advisor, and later becomes the Secretary of State under Nixon. All right, Nixon and détente. Well, what exactly is détente? Well, détente was a relaxation of tensions between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, and the U.S., of course, and China. And what it was an idea that what we should do is do whatever we could, of course, to engage both of these foreign enemies in dialogue, of course, that could lead to, arms limitations and have it's kind of hard in some cases to fight a friend. So what we wanted to do, of course, is to get a working relationship with them. Let's talk about Vietnamization for a few minutes. It was created by Kissinger and Nixon to pull the U.S. out of Vietnam by equipping and training the South Vietnamese to protect themselves and resist communism. The United States of America would not take on the responsibility of fighting for, the South Vietnamese, but give them the tools necessary that they can defend themselves. Nixon shifted American foreign policy to a more relaxed approach with China and USSR, once again by the détente. And Nixon's trip to China was the first step the U.S. took to recognize communist China. And Nixon also normalized the U.S.'s relationship with the Soviet Union by making a trip to Moscow to meet with Leonid Brezhnev, who was the Soviet premier. And out of that talk came the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty 1, which reduced, or well, really reduced, but it froze the number of strategic nuclear weapons being created by both the United States and the Soviet Union. Here's a picture of President Nixon on the left and the USSR's premier, Leonid Brezhnev, on the right. All right, what we're going to do is take a few minutes and give you an opportunity to copy this particular bubble map. And what we want you to do is to copy this particular bubble map, and we're going to give you a few minutes to go through and identify 6 of Nixon's foreign policy goals. At this time, go ahead and copy that down. In a few moments, we will go to an activity break, give you the opportunity to work on it, and then we'll come back and discuss. All right, you should have had enough time that you were able to go through, of course, and look at Nixon's 6 foreign policy goals. What we're going to do is, we won't go over all of them, but what we're going to do is kind of summarize a few of them and give you an opportunity to see some answers that you possibly should have gotten. Well, the first one, if you look at it, Nixon's foreign policy goals included things like détente. We said he opened relations, of course, with China. He was the first president to recognize communist China. And then we're going to find that what he's going to do, of course, is promote this idea that our allies should not have to depend on us, of course, for their defense, but we would do what we could as a country to support them against communism. And then, of course, Vietnamization, the gradual pullout of American troops from Vietnam. Why was Nixon able to win the election of 1968 having lost the election in 1960? Is the first lesson focused question. And number 2, what were Nixon's foreign policy goals? Well, let's look at 1. Why was Nixon able to win the election in 1968 having lost the election in 1960? Discontent over Vietnam, that's what we're telling you a little bit later. Social unrest or civil unrest, of course, that came because of the deaths of JFK, of course, and the death of Robert F. Kennedy and the death of MLK. And then social upheaval, riots in the streets of America, violence, of course, because of that violence, and then the desire of older people for law and order and the fragmentation of the Democratic Party. 2, what were Nixon's foreign policy goals? To achieve peace with honor in Vietnam, with Vietnamization, détente with China and the Soviet Union, a realistic approach to international relations, and to reduce Cold War tensions. So when you look at the presidency of Richard Nixon, it is the result of all the upheaval that starts, of course, with Vietnam and Johnson's escalation of American involvement in Vietnam. And you can give, Nixon credit. He seizes upon an opportunity, of course, to mobilize, the silent majority, get them out in the vote, and it gets him, of course, into the White House. And we're going to find that because of that, Nixon doesn't really trust himself as president of the United States of America. He didn't trust his popularity enough, and he's going to do some things, of course, that'll go a little bit sideways for his presidency. All right, this is Coach Anderson from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online U.S. History from 1877 to present. We hope you've enjoyed some of our insights, of course, on Richard Nixon, and we're going to talk about Nixon a little bit more as we go. And we're going to find that Nixon is a very intriguing president of the United States of America, and his story is a lot more complicated than people will let on in some cases. But once again, don't take my word for it. This is Coach Anderson, and do what I always tell you. Do your own research and reach your own conclusions. And with that, I'll see you next time.